Greetings. Well, it seems we can't do 50 Shades of Creepy anymore because of reasons and copyrights and things. In lieu of not having anything else prepared for this week, I thought I would read an excerpt from a manuscript that I have been working on. So here we have a portion of Chapter 1 of Son of a Preacher Man. Here we go. Church services are a bit like football games. When you think the clock is about to run out, someone blows a whistle, which stretches the strained public affair on uncomfortable seats out longer. That was my opinion on the subject, at least. Judging by the expressions on a few congregation members' faces, I wasn't the only one who thought so. The microphone in my hand felt slippery from sweat. I was nervous looking out at the pews full of mostly bored faces, but not to the point where I was sweating out of my hands. Whoever had used this particular mic before me had clammy palms. I noticed a couple of snickering faces to my right. Crystal Waters Southern Baptist Church had two dividing wings located on either side of the pulpit. The left side was reserved for the elderly elite, those with old money, and had a private door leading straight to the parking lot for faster exiting. No one on that side used the private door. Part of being old and rich was walking down the main aisle after services concluded to congratulate the minister on his sermon, then complaining on the way to the car about how long the sermon took. The right dividing wing was used by the Crystal Waters Youth Group. It had a door leading out to a narrow alley between the church and the gym. Most youth group members used it as a way of avoiding being nagged by their parents or pinched on the cheek by those elderly who weren't rich enough to sit in the left wing and who had never learned to keep their hands to themselves. I ignored the jackasses sitting in the right wing area and gave a nod to the man sitting in the very back. The church kept the sound equipment in a small station. The area had been set aside by leaving one pew missing, making the row one pew shorter than the other. Whoever sat in the station was to cue the music whenever the singer for the special music was ready. I had been landed with the task on this particular Sunday. Special music was a period set aside after hymnals had been sang, but before the minister began his sermon. I have no idea why it's done, but I've been singing it since I was too short to stand behind the pulpit without a chair to give me a boost. It isn't something I do each and every week, thankfully, but whenever the music director asks me to sing on Sundays, I am expected to say yes. The song is a fast-paced one, and not one I would have picked for myself. People have been telling me I have a wonderful voice, save for a stint when I was 12 after my first real voice change. I don't think I sound terrible now exactly, but I'll never take Broadway or LA Records by storm. When the song finishes, there is polite applause. I make a quick check of the fourth row from the front. My mother and father are sitting there along with Christine and Samantha, my two older sisters, and Lynette, the youngest. I put the microphone back down and marched down the carpeted stairs as the weak applause died out completely. Ignoring the looks and pointed snickering from the youth group wing, I walk as calmly as I can to the fourth pew and slide in. Lynette sticks her tongue out at me as I pass by, but I ignore her. We were in church, and smacking her publicly would have landed me in more hot water than if I did it in private. Christine's smile is stiff, like she's trying to win a beauty pageant. Samantha looks at me like she might start giggling as much as the youth kids are, but there's a sincere quality to her face at the same time. Try as I might, I can't bring myself to be too annoyed with her. Dad acts like I'm not trying to maneuver past him and his crossed legs. Mom waits until I've wormed my way past to her. Mom waits until I've wormed my way past to slide on her. Bleh. Mom waits until I've slid past her opposite to. Mom waits until I've sat down on her right side opposite Dad to comment on my performance. "That was good," she muttered crisply out of the corner of her mouth. "You sang loud just like I told you to." I don't reply, seeing no reason to. The minister has already taken his place behind the pulpit to begin the sermon, and I would just as soon sit quietly so the time passes faster. That, and talking at the same time as Brother Macmillan would earn me a smack from her. I learned this years ago. Sitting still during church sermons is much easier said than done, however. For one thing, I find them pretentious and full of tedium. Secondly, I had a habit of fidgeting when I couldn't get comfortable. There are few things in the world more uncomfortable to sit on than a church pew. Never allow the amount of padding placed on one to deceive you. It is only a lie to lure you into a trap and leave you with severe back pain. Church pews are designed to be uncomfortable so the congregation doesn't fall asleep. Mind you, that isn't to say people don't sleep during church services. Some of the best naps I've ever had were when I dozed off while Brother Macmillan rambled on. No one, not even my physics teacher, could take a subject and wring it out until it was as dry as a bone like the overweight man looming over the room at present. Macmillan loved preaching from the Old Testament. He preferred to save the 4 Gospels for April when Easter rolled around, and the Christmas story for December. I had actually read the Old Testament pretty well before now. Mother was insistent on all of her children knowing the Lord from an early age. She read us boulderdized versions of Bible stories before we could read, then had us move on to study pamphlets once we had progressed far enough to learn on our own. I had gotten curious enough back in elementary school to read the Bible stories I'd been reared on straight from the source. The juxtaposition was jarring, to say the least. The Old Testament had more sex, rape, and general violence than any late-night movie on HBO. It made me wonder back then why so many adults wished their children read the good book more. That wasn't anything I pointed out to my parents or people in general, though. Even at the age of 9, I recognized that it wouldn't have been a very good idea. I was already getting antsy. The sermon wasn't even 5 minutes in, but Brother Macmillan's voice was especially monotonous today. A clear sky full of sunshine streamed through the clear spots of the painted glass, striking me in the eye. I shouldn't have trouble staying awake with that in my face, but it made getting comfortable even more problematic. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a small wadded napkin that I had prepared that morning before we left for Sunday school. Inside were several sweet tarts of various color and flavor. I popped one into my mouth and tucked the candy into the corner between the cheek and gum line before laying the napkin to the side. It was a little trick I had picked up on the sly last Easter. When I had a piece of candy to suck on, it was a lot easier to stay still. I was 17, but still squirmed like a 6-year-old during church services. It was something my mother was deeply ashamed of. As Brother Macmillan read from the heavy, dog-eared copy of the Bible he kept on hand for sermons, I began to enter my fugue state. It was easy to dip into a Zen-like trance whenever that man spoke, and it helped pass the time much faster. I had learned over the years not to resist. While the minister rambled on, I found myself doing battle with aliens of the bizarre biology flavor inside a giant robot. Once my final attack and victory pose was completed, I shifted gears to racing through the mountains of Akita in Japan in a souped-up drift car. This went on for a bit until one of the racers behind me cut a flip during a nasty turn. My brain mentally ejected me from the fantasy back to the church pew to see how the sermon was going before I was flattened. Macmillan was still ranting on in his phlegmic tone, which came as no shock whatsoever. Glancing to my right to see whether or not Mom was paying attention, I did a quick flick of my wrist, exposing the watch tucked away under the sleeve of my Sunday dress shirt. 7 minutes had passed since my song ended. I had hoped we'd be further along than this, but there was little point to wishing Macmillan would tire out any time soon, or at least become genuinely enthused about whatever subject he was preaching on. Now that I'd thought on it, I wasn't even sure what chapter or book of the Bible he was supposed to be reading from. Deciding it wasn't relevant, I reached over and popped another sweet tart into my mouth before zoning out again. It took 3 more giant robot battles and a run-through of a variant on a magical transformation sequence that I was partial to before the sermon was even halfway over. Bored now with my brain's series of anime-esque mind trips, I decided to switch gears and mull over a fanfic plot bunny that had sprung on me in the middle of the night last weekend. I was what some people called an Occidental otaku. I'd discovered anime a couple of years back and had been hooked ever since, despite my mother's best efforts to purge it from her household. Ironically, perhaps, I had a certain fondness for the harem anime genre, and my favorite of the bunch was the classic OVA Tenchi Muyo Ryoki. I had conceived the idea of a relative of the protagonist attending a school for teenagers with ESP powers and becoming a local hero after bonding with a tree from outer space. It sounded ideal to me, though I was distantly aware that anyone unfamiliar to the series would likely not have a clue what anything meant, though the original series in and of itself was pretty strange. Wrestling with some of the finer points of the first chapter helped me through the remainder of the sermon. When Brother Macmillan stepped away from the pulpit, I snapped at attention, thinking that it would be over soon. Of course, someone chose that moment to blow the whistle. Before we have our closing hymnal, Jason Hill, the youth director and assistant pastor, said after stepping up to the pulpit, there were a couple of announcements that I was told needed to be made. Jason placed a certain amount of emphasis on the word told, which grabbed my attention slightly. Rather than make the announcements himself, however, Jason backed away from the pulpit without another word. Immediately, I had a bad feeling. Lord God, I heard my mother swear anxiously under his breath. Sure enough, less than a minute later, Misty Gibbons was sauntering down the aisle toward the pulpit with her electronic notepad in hand. Behind her was a slightly heavy-set woman in a bright red suit, enormous belt, and oversized shoulder pads named Alice Higginbotham, who fell in step behind Mears Gibbons like a perfect foot soldier. I had known Misty Gibbons for most of my life. She was something of a notorious figure in Crystal Waters. If you lived in the community, and especially if you attended Crystal Waters Southern Baptist Church, you knew precisely who Misty Gibbons was. If you were smart, you went out of your way to never cross her in any shape or fashion. I suspected that most places had a Misty Gibbons, and wondered if it wasn't a type of club. The Gibbons were some of the oldest and wealthiest people in the community. They owned the Gibbons department store in the local shopping center, the truck stop on the interstate going north out of Crystal Waters towards central Mississippi, the restaurant that required most people to make reservations, and a strip club a few miles away in Biloxi. No one was supposed to talk about the strip club, though, despite it being the worst-kept secret in Crystal Waters. Mother had expressly forbade me from speaking aloud on the subject. I didn't see the point since everyone else already knew, but Mother had laid down the law with that look in her eye. Whenever she had that look, it was a bad idea to go against her, at least publicly. Alice Higginbotham was a different story. The Higginbothams were a family that weren't as rich or anywhere near as influential as the Gibbons. Alice had been bequeathed the honor, or the task, according to how one saw it, of serving Misty Gibbons in all her Christian woman duties. Misty Gibbons had a lot of them. She ran the Church Ladies Association, was in charge of the Crystal Waters Thanksgiving Day Parade float design, directed the Crystal Waters Southern Baptist Christmas pageant every year, organized the Crystal Waters Pep Squad charity drive, and delivered Meals on Wheels in her spare time. Alice Higginbotham was usually seen at Misty Gibbons' side whenever she performed these tasks, looking quite harried and overworked. This particular Sunday, Misty Gibbons must have allowed Alice Higginbotham the morning off to spend time with her family, since she looked a little less exhausted than usual. The entire congregation settled back down into their respective pews and waited as Misty Gibbons took the pulpit with Mears Higginbotham standing behind her just off to the side. I thought I saw Jason Hill wearing a painful smirk for a second before Mears Higginbotham blocked him from view. And that's that. If you'd like to hear more, rate, comment, subscribe, let me know. See you next time.